Okay, very well. So let's begin. We'll begin a little bit slower. We have some introductory slides, so if anybody joins a little bit later, they will miss just some basic introduction and an overview of what's ahead of us. So hopefully they're not going to be at a big loss. Perfect. So I'll also try to stay on camera as much as my internet connection allows it. But again, a very, very warm welcome to everyone joining us here today. We're going to be discussing exactly what is in front of you right now, the opportunities or challenges and opportunities and future development paths for big data applications and solutions in the EU built environment, and some concrete examples and ideas and thoughts, and hopefully also some outcomes from the discussions that we're going to have here in terms of what to include when scoping these development paths. So I'm really looking forward to this almost 2 hours that's ahead of us. Just to give you an overview what to expect today. We are, I think, almost right on time. We'll begin with a few opening words, just a bit of welcome. We'll then go on to presenting where we are right now. In terms of the project, this webinar, of course, as you've been well informed, is part of the project that we're doing in cooperation with the European Commission. That is why, as you can see here on the left side, we will have input and discussions with, I would say, 2 key people from the European Commission representing DG Energy and also DG Grow, who are going to tell us about the digital strategy for buildings, what's new there or what's planned, and also the energy performance of buildings directive. We have at each step in the agenda, we have a Q&A time buffer or for any questions that you may have from the organizational perspective. I would like to ask you to direct these questions in the Zoom chat. I hope everybody has or has this feature available on your computer or on your phone. My good colleague here on the call with us, Michal Zaval, will be looking out for your questions, looking out for your comments. And at the opportune time, we will include them and direct them. Then, of course, we'll move into discussing a little bit what are the future opportunities that are currently visible and some of the future opportunities that perhaps we have already learned from you, but always looking to learn more, which is why we also like to give you a little outline of how to participate in the project, how you can have a say, and how you can influence what the outcomes of the projects are going to be. We have among us 3 companies that have been carefully selected from a wide range of companies under consideration. These companies are Sharry Tech, Urban Data Analytics, and Cross-CPP. They represent different parts of the big data ecosystem as we see it. And I think they will definitely help us frame the discussion in terms of what are the opportunities and how far-reaching the concept of big data and its impact on energy efficiency may be or should be considered. So they will tell us a little bit about what they are currently working on and hopefully also some outlooks for the future. And through this perspective or through this optic, they will outline hopefully as well some key challenges and some key obstacles they're facing and potential solutions to how to approach them and how to address them. Please also take this as a little bit of a, let's say, a conversation starter to think a little bit outside of the box in terms of what can be done, what could be achieved, and what are the potential avenues for further development. We will have also a short 10-minute break before we move into some of the insights into the current and upcoming EU support. As I already mentioned, we have 2 great colleagues here joining us from the European Commission who will share with us their current work priorities, ambitions, and visions. So really looking forward to that as well. And finally, we will have some time for to outline next steps and also to catch up on any questions that perhaps you may have towards the end after we've gone through everything, or perhaps some of the questions that will remain unanswered in the different parts of the presentation. So having said that, I would now just very briefly give the word to our colleague Pau Garcia from the European Commission. Pau, if I may ask you, perhaps just a word of welcome to our participants joining us here today, if you will.
Sure. Well, hello, good afternoon, everybody. Very nice having you all here today, and thank you very much for participating. This is an initiative that is very relevant for us, as I will discuss later. Actually, it's one of the biggest problems we have is the lack of information and the lack of data on the building stock in generally, and particularly on the energy performance of the building stock and buildings. So the findings of this project, the steps ahead that it can point to us are very, very relevant, particularly now that we are at a moment where we are about to start the revision of the PPT. So looking very much forward to hearing about the different findings of the projects and the individual projects that they are going to be participating today, and where these initiatives can take us. So thank you very much for all of you to be here today.
Thank you very much, Paul. I think everybody's equally happy to be here and equally happy to share and to discuss openly, as you mentioned. And I think I'll use that a little bit as a bridge to just highlight some of the main points. As already mentioned, this webinar is organized in the context of a project we do together with the European Commission. And the key objectives of the project is, of course, to provide a better understanding or better visibility of what are the current and potential uses of big data. Sorry, I understand there's an echo. Let me just try to adjust that. One of the microphones will work better than the other. I hope that's better. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. Excellent, perfect. So just as I was saying, to have a better understanding and better visibility of what are the current, let's say, most promising applications and, of course, potential avenues of development for big data and its impact on energy in the EU built environment. Of course, understanding or increasing the understanding of stakeholders' needs and challenges. What are the limitations as well? We've discussed some of these topics already with you individually in our stakeholder consultations. So we're very happy that, of course, we're not happy that there are some challenges, but we're very happy that we are together unveiling them and uncovering them. It's very good for the analysis that is part of this project. And then together, of course, we're investigating future development paths, which will lead us for, let's say, unlocking the potential of big data in the EU in the EU built environment. The, let's say, scope or the time frame of the recommendations or the avenues or the paths that we're trying to explore and trying to outline is from 3 to 5 years. So really orienting ourselves into the very near future or midterm perspective in order to deliver the biggest impact. To put it into even a wider context, one of the motivations that this project is building on or coming from is the fact that digitization in the building sector is a little bit more on the theoretical side still, and has earned one of the lowest digitalization scores in a study developed by Build Up EU. And of course, dealing with energy performance, this is one of the key, let's say, key areas for potential to further leverage big data to enhance energy performance of buildings, but also the underlying infrastructure. So a little bit of numbers and some statistics, why buildings are of core interest here, and what they can mean or what they represent in terms of the energy consumption in Europe. But it has to be said here that, and we discussed this already bilaterally with some of you, is that in the project we are, of course, the main focus is on buildings and how they impact energy performance and how big data can impact that in turn. But we are trying to adopt an approach as wide as possible here, because we understand that it's not only about the buildings, but it's about the wider ecosystem that sort of comes together. And when talking about big data, we're trying to also identify the connections and see if through specific measures of support, the entire ecosystem can be brought up and can be enhanced. As you can see here from the logos below, what I should mention at this point is that the project is delivered by Ernst & Young, where I'm coming from. My name is Sharry Tech. I'm also joined here on this call by my good colleagues Michal Zaval and Aaron Neville from our German office. So pleasure to have you guys here. And we're of course doing this in cooperation with the Fraunhofer Institute of Systems Innovation Research. So very happy for this collaboration. I think we really put together a very, very strong team to deliver on the promise to find and to uncover these areas or these avenues for future development. So very excited about the outcomes, not only of this webinar, but of the project in general. And without further ado, I'm already going to slide over and outline a little bit where we are now in the project and what are some of the key things that we have identified. So what is the state of play of big data in the EU built environment, according to the steps that we have already conducted in the project, and some of the consultations that we already held with some of you guys bilaterally. And with this, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Aaron.
Yes, sure.
Hi, Aaron. Welcome.
Hey, you. Hi. Thanks for the warm welcome to you and also to Pau. Glad you're all here. As you mentioned, I am going to talk a little bit about what we've observed so far. Basically, 3 parts in this project. We have as Juraj mentioned, the big data analytics state of play, the first part, and the second part, looking at scoping possible avenues of big data and the built environment, and the third part is we're looking at the existing EPC energy performance certificate databases, including looking at establishing a connection to the building stock observatory. So these are the 3 phases. I'm going to talk a little bit about the first phase, where we look at what is out there and what is being done. And to put it right away and ahead of what I'm going to talk about, is there is a huge discrepancy in terms of maturity in big data applications in the built environment, in infrastructure that we observe in geographies. In general, one could observe a trend that in the Northern European parts, there's, especially in the smaller countries, Nordic countries, there's a lot of advance in terms of energy performance and buildings and built infrastructure and environment. And whereas you go further down south, it becomes less and less mature, which is quite interesting in terms of the challenge that is ahead of kind of consolidating and developing policy to get a better overview in the future. As Pau mentioned in the beginning, currently the big challenge is that there is a lack of overview of what is actually being measured, how it's being measured, and this is precisely what we looked at. So what did we look at? We looked at, with regards to buildings, we looked at the building itself. It encompasses the building type, the building history, the materials, and related infrastructure and systems, and how the data is being collected regarding these issues. Then we looked at the built environment, everything surrounding the building. This could be the weather, the geographical cadastral information. It could also involve social and economic indicators. Quite interesting. In some cases, we have observed that these are being collected as well, whereas in other parts of Europe, this is not yet the case. By the way, we did look at all 27 European countries, so we have a very comprehensive overview. And the third dimension that we looked at, obviously, is the energy performance data that is being collected, and what quality and what frequency. And speaking of quality and frequency, the method that we used in order to evaluate this, we looked at a so-called big data value chain, which is composed of 5 components, basically data acquisition, data analysis, data curation, data storage, and data utilization. I hope they are mostly self-explanatory what is happening there. These are all components that can be considered in terms of the big data environment, big data applications. And time does not allow that I go all too deep into our findings, but maybe the three areas that we found very interesting results is first on the political and regulatory area, then secondly on the technological and infrastructure dimension, and then third on the economical and social. And what we found is at first on the technological and infrastructure area, when we look at big data applications along the big data value chain, is there is a vast amount of different institutions, private startups, private public startups that are using different technologies to acquire data, to store data, to curate data, and to make sense of it, basically data usage, and have fancy applications running over it to basically get relevant insights. There's a huge breadth, as you can imagine, and it's non-standardized. What we've been asking ourselves and what we've looked at is there kind of an ideal way on a large scale to standardize these aspects along the big data value chain? And so far, there are some architectural aspects that seem very attractive, that are being piloted in certain countries. I'm looking, for example, at Denmark, relatively advanced with a almost real-time monitoring of energy performance related data on building and infrastructure that could be maybe adopted. We also see it in the private sector. Some private sector companies, some of them are in this call right now, are using for their own infrastructure very sophisticated data analysis, big data architecture. And then we have very innovative small startups that are coming around the corner with very interesting solutions. And when we look at recommendations of basically what we like, our conclusion, our intermediate conclusion on the technological and infrastructure level is that it would be good in our, what we think is to have a higher standardization. Maybe regarding all the points along the big data value chain, in order to have better communication in between the different systems, and also to promote more automation. What we've observed, we're talking about big data, and I'm sure most of us are thinking about very fancy applications and so on and so forth right now. Some of the data is still being collected on paper in some regions in the European Union, and they're being put into the drawer, and then in a certain time interval, they're being reported to the EU. So there are vast amounts of data in a very non-digital format that have to be first digitalized. So that's still happening. So basically start with digitizing the data and start automating the data acquisition process, the data curation, and also the algorithms that make sense out of it. And then on an economical, social, as well as regulatory, because I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm trying to wrap it up. The most significant challenge that we observed is, as you might guess, are around data privacy issues. Because if we start collecting these highly sophisticated data not only about energy usage of individuals and buildings, but furthermore, we also look at environmental factors, social factors, so on and so forth. Then we are collecting a lot of data that is very sensitive, and there are a lot of things to consider, basically, in terms of data privacy. If such applications should become the norm in order to collect data and to centrally gather it and use it in order to create or in order to derive policy decisions in the future. So this is one of the crucial findings. The sensitivity of the data is quite a hurdle, and there needs to be there is already a lot of initiatives in terms of policy, but it's certainly an area that still needs to be in focus. So, and then one other finding is also define common standards in data security, communication technology, platform contestability, and the increasing adaptability, which is right now at a somewhat slow pace. And then what goes along with this is maybe to also enable and incentivize the development and realization of new actors, new models, innovative platforms in a regulatory framework, and to stimulate involvement and participation of citizens to get access to concealed and sensitive data. So if we don't involve the citizens, what we observe is there will be very low acceptance of these very sophisticated tools and applications that we've observed that are actually quite useful in getting a good overview, but they are sensitive. And these are the areas, the most crucial areas that we currently think need to be looked at. There are a couple of other areas that are more technical in terms of data architecture along the big data value chain. I haven't dived into those right now, but I'm happy to answer questions if you want to ask more technical deep dive questions. So back to you, Juraj.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Thank you. I know that it's really difficult to stay sort of in confines of time, especially when you're talking about a topic where you can get so passionate about. So I understand completely, but we do have a little bit of a time constraint here. Nevertheless, I think Aaron provided a perfect sort of sneak peek into some of the discoveries and some of the confirmations, also what we got from the stakeholder confirmation so far. So I would really say that please do keep in touch and do stay on the lookout for any updates. We will be sharing, of course, also the findings, but we would definitely like to be in touch with you more closely, more directly, because I think some of the questions that or some of the topics that we're covering here are not necessarily something that can be easily explored, you know, via let's say remote and let's say offline methods. So any discussion that you would be interested in having with us, we would be extremely happy to do so. We'll find the time and try to accommodate and connect with you. We will include a summary of contacts if you wish to reach out to us, but you should already have some of our contact information based on your fact that you're here, because you can, of course, respond to any of the emails used in the invitations, and we'll be happy to follow up with that. So as Aaron already mentioned, there are, of course, implementation concerns, technical concerns. By the way, of course, the presentation that we have here, we can also make it available for anybody who cannot see it properly, is maybe on the phone, or would like to go through some of the points also afterwards. But it's not only about gaps and challenges, but also future opportunities. And that's really where the most creative part comes in this project, and where we're really happy about that and really looking forward to it. As long as we have strong indications and strong intelligence to build on, we will, of course, work with you to deliver the best ideas for how the future development of big data in the EU-built environment should sort of be steered into which direction. So just to go through some of the points that so far has surfaced from all this work that we've done and from all the interactions that we had with you, our deal stakeholders. Of course, some of the activities that we have in our notes are around discovering new business models and new use cases. So the abundance of data, of course, provides for some creativity in this sense. But of course, there are some implications or some challenges, as already Aaron mentioned, in terms of how consistent and how standardized and interoperable this data is. Maybe just to highlight a few, as you can already see in the gold or yellow color. So improving the standardization, definitely one of the crucial focus points for us going forward. Ongoing digitalization of the building stock, definitely also among the priorities. This will be, this is great because we also have Ilektra here with us, who will tell us a little bit more about what's happening from the EU perspective or the European Commission's perspective, and also stimulating the involvement and participation in citizens, right? So the uptake of big data solutions and big data projects. So sort of in a way to develop a sustainable ecosystem and sustainable, perhaps even market for big data applications, big data solutions. And what has emerged also from many of the, from much of the feedback that we've gathered and received so far is, let's call them smart instruments supporting financing of big data solutions, right? So smart in the sense of perhaps allowing for a combination of financial and non-financial instruments of support. According to some of the responses so far, this seems to be, or there seems to be a little bit of a gap in terms of the supply that doesn't really meet the demand. So definitely another area which we're very keen on finding out more about. We also have some preliminary results from the survey or from the online questionnaire that we have kindly asked you to fill in. And in terms of what are the, let's say, the biggest challenges coming in very strong are concerns about or issues with privacy, with interoperability, with standardization. So this is very much in line with the points here and with what is going to be at the core or the focus of our work. And you're already providing some interesting ideas and interesting, let's say, concepts of how to approach these solutions and how to move past them or overcome these obstacles. So we'll be, of course, looking forward to learning more from you. And in terms of how to do this, just a little bit of an overview or summary, how to take part and how to join us in our work. Of course, the reason is I think fairly obvious. It's a unique opportunity to influence the formulation of new supportive policy and measures. In which direction or which direction should the support lead to in terms of supporting big data applications in the EU building environment, and as well, of course, the let's say connected or the ecosystems that are in a way connected to this. If we're talking about smart mobility or the more broader concept of smart cities, etc. So these sort of things are really well within scope of our work here, and we're really looking forward to your say. Of course, we are looking for mainly gaps and challenges and opportunities that you see as something that could be supported in the future. And if possible, also share with us any, let's say, priorities that you have where you're perhaps even investing or investing all your efforts, and which could be the, let's say, next big thing in big data. If there's a chance to find the alignment and support that direction as well. I think it's definitely a viable option to explore. So you do have a email here that's for me personally, so you can contact us there. But as I mentioned, we will provide a summary of contact information at the very end. A key date to consider is you all received the invitation to the questionnaire. If you haven't, please do let us know. We'll happily share it again. If you have and you haven't yet responded, please do so until the end of March. And in between, until the 31st of March, we remain completely at your disposal and very much interested in what you have to say in this regard. And I'm running a little bit out of time, so without delaying further, I would now very much like to give the floor to you and to basically provide some space to reflect and to react what we have said so we have said so far here, both myself, my colleague Aaron, or perhaps also the initial words of Pau. If there are any thoughts or any ideas, something to include in the discussion here, we'll be happy to hear that. Michael, is there anything, any question in the chat from participants?
Yes, sorry, can you hear me right?
Yes, perfect.
Yes, we have a question from Anton. Anton is asking if missing a bit of embodied carbon so far, at least document part on climate change challenge.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Anton. So definitely a very technical question, I would say. Thank you for raising that. Perhaps maybe this could be left a little bit for the discussion once we're discussing also the perspective of the European Commission, or I don't know, Aaron, if you want to say anything about embodied carbon and how it came up in the previous analysis, if at all.
Let's talk about it in a bit.
Okay, perfect. So we'll keep in this question for the for when discussing also the let's say the policy approach to that as well. So we'll come back to that. Thank you very much, Anton. Anybody else with a question? Anything you would like to mention here? Okay, well then if not, then I would very much like to invite to the stage our three, let's say, presentations or showcases. And let's say we would like to highlight 2 points that we would like to ask our guests to try to mention or try to touch upon in the presentation in any form or any context as you may consider best. First up, we would like to take it a little bit from the ground up. So we would like to give the word to Sharry Tech. Of course, a very prominent developer and provider of IoT and the related ecosystem. So without further ado, I would invite Sharry Tech. You should now have full control for screen sharing, and it works perfect. Thank you very much. And the floor is yours, roughly 8 to 10 minutes. And if you have any questions from the audience, please do let us know. Questions coming in as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So
thank you, Andre.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andre Langer, and I head the product development at Sharry. And what is Sharry? Sharry is a technology company in the commercial real estate space. And we help owners to turn their building into premium service. How we do that? We do it by integrating different building systems that are already in the building on one platform with one user interface and great user experience. We cover and we address parking, mobile access, tenant engagement platform, meaning we create a space for tenants to engage and use building services in. And we also cover guest management. That said, I would like to talk about the role of data in commercial buildings, how we see it. When I speak of data, what I really mean by that is understanding and action. Because in the end, the way we think about it, we see data as means to those ends, and the data itself, unless used, brings fairly little value. So what is happening in the commercial real estate right now? Obviously, with the last pandemics year, we have seen new trends emerging and existing trends being accelerated that include work from anywhere, being the new 9 to 5. So much more flexibility with regards to using the space or maybe not using the space of the buildings or different patterns of using the space. Another of those trends is the 3-2-2, meaning 3 days in the office, 2 days home office, 2 days at a 2-day weekend. So those two are actually not contradictory. Those two are just different patterns of where companies are moving. And we're also seeing, or we're expecting, despite the vaccination efforts going through the world, we are expecting some pandemic waves to continue, although hopefully with much lesser amplitude. And we are, up to these trends, different organizations respond differently, and depending on their company culture, depending the sector they're in. And a result of this is a huge unpredictability with regards to the world that property owners and property managers live in. So understanding that space is important for some of the building operations, and right now they're in a situation where a lot of the times they don't know what's coming due to the factors that we're talking about. So how does the data fit within? What role does data play here? So for Sharry, currently the data helps to utilize parking. So when you know who is coming to the building and when, what you know about the occupants, you can actually much better utilize the space that's inside the building. The data helps to monitor operations, meaning understand how the building is going on, provide additional insights. The data helps to monitor quality of service the owner is providing to their tenants. So these services include visitor management, they include the actual utilization of the space, responding to requests, and so on. So these are the sort of like operational things, but the way we think about it, this is really just a start to where we're going. And before I illustrate where we're going is, let me state that one of the obstacles, I've been asked about the obstacles we are seeing, is that to have data does not always equal to understand. And there is a long journey from even understanding to act upon the data. And to give an example, in Italy, March 2020, the pandemic was already sweeping the hospitals, and basically the rest of the world did have the data on large enough sample, but the world didn't want to understand. And from there to acting, that there was a still relatively long journey. So the barriers between data and acting on the data that are probably much beyond the scope of this talk, but they include cognitive biases, they include capacity, skills, organizational obstacles, which on its own would be on a long talk. But what if we could overcome these barriers and make the data actually actionable? On an example, for a property manager, for a person responsible for operating a building, knowing that the average garage overnight occupancy is 13.12%, what does it tell me as a property manager? It's a low number, right? But can I do something about it, or what should I do with that information? What if you could offer those spaces to residents living in the same neighborhood, in buildings that are in a permanent shortage of parking spots, in an area where there is a lack of parking spots? So the commercial buildings have free spots overnight, and the neighborhoods just around them have free spots maybe during the day, but overnight they're crowded as people come back from the place they're working and they want to stay. So clearly, for this sort of scenarios or use cases, you do need very reliable data to rest upon to ensure that you are not going to give that additional capacity to residents, give the capacity that you would actually need in the morning when people working in the offices get back. Another sort of a dimension of how the data can help is that if you look at one building, maybe there is the scenarios I talked about, the operational things can improve lives of people in the building, but from a global perspective, they're neglectable. But if you look at tens of buildings, so they form a city. If you look at hundreds or thousands of buildings, they're a future work. And the data about the future of work can be used as benchmarks and provided back to those buildings to understand where they're where they could get better, and well, maybe their competition is doing better. So these are the challenges and the journey that we're facing. And with I took this is called basically benchmarking, and with benchmarking open data sources, so using other data about those cities, machine learning, prescriptive algorithms, really the future of work is bright. And that was the last point I wanted to make. So thank you very much. And I hand over back to Juraj.
Thank you very much, Andre. Thank you for the interesting presentation. Maybe just something to highlight towards the end, just for the sake of clarity. We're discussing here also let's say, as I mentioned, the challenges and perhaps also some opportunities. Now, I don't want you to reveal anything that confidential that you're working on, but I'm sure that you came across some let's say interesting intelligence or data sources, data sets that you could benefit from, and maybe, as I know that you're also present your ambition is more markets, so something that you've seen also in the sense from interoperability perspective.
Yeah, so to take your question from the first part, so with regards to where we primarily looking at is putting that data into the context. So that context, it is a journey, and we start from the inner context. So the context of the tenants, the sources of data that we're using, or we look at using the first or in the near future, are the ones where we provide additional value by really mixing the operational data with the data we have about the tenant. Things like informing the property manager that some tenants might be in a risk of leaving. That's sort of we work with the data from the inner context. But when we look, several more than a quarter or two ahead, where we really see a big part of the value is in benchmarking, in really helping to understand how am I doing within the industry, like what are the things where I could optimize better potentially. So for that, what are the specific data sets? We have some ideas. Those are rather open-ended at this point. I can imagine typically data about the context of the city, so data about traffic, maybe now data about what the new constraints with regards to epidemiologic situations are. Data related to public transport generally. That sort of things are data sets we're looking at. If that answers your question.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And in terms of let's say the level of granularity that you see from market to market, your experience so far,
with
comparable or
availability, as mentioned, currently we're primarily working with the data that we have. So I mean, with regards to public transport, I know we had to reach out to different third-party services that basically standardize that sort of data for us. So yes, interoperability and local specifics. Generally, we do foresee as potentially problematic areas, but to be honest, in some of the areas we're looking at, I'm not sure we are that far to know.
Okay, perfect, noted. Well, thank you very much. Maybe also to our dear audience, is there a question that you would perhaps like to ask Andre? Can either raise the hand or write in the chat, any preferred option, and there of course is the Q&A feature as well. do let us know if you remember at a later point. We're monitoring them constantly, so we'll definitely come back to that. Okay, perfect. So so much from Sharry. Thank you very much. And now turning a little bit to a different, let's say, domain, but still staying within buildings or working with buildings. I would like to give the word to Urban Data Analytics, which is a platform that focuses on real estate and providing an end-to-end solution consultancy in terms of valuation and turning data into assets that can be used for real estate in the real estate market or industry. Manuel?
Hi, so my name is Manuel Cacho. As Jura kindly noted, our aim in the big data space is slightly different. We're not so focused on the construction, but more on a financial angle. So I'll briefly introduce Urban Data Analytics, which is the company that I'm representing, and how we use data, how we treat it, as well as sort of some of the challenges that we've seen. I'll try to be brief, given the time limit. So with regards to the history of the company, don't want to spend too much time here, but basically this is a prop tech company that was developed in 2013. The initial vision or aim of the company was to create a sort of Bloomberg for real estate assets. Basically, the real estate market is not transparent. It's actually quite opaque due to its nature. And it's also a market in which the individual consumer is far more affected by it than, for example, the stock market. I mean, not everyone buys stocks, but most people want to buy or rent a house. So having transparency and democratizing this space is important to sort of the average European. Obviously, the aim of creating a Bloomberg for real estate assets is a challenging one, and it's complex due to the fact that real estate assets are not perfectly homogeneous the way that stocks are, and they're not perfectly interchangeable or comparable. But that is sort of the problem that UDA came to solve. It developed its activity over 6 years, and in 2019 it was acquired by a large Spanish investment bank, which is called Ilektra, and which is currently, let's say, sort of strengthening the company and pushing it to the next level. So with regards to what we do and how we do or how we use our big data, I would summarize basically in sort of 4 or 5 angles. We, as was briefly mentioned, we advise investors in acquisition processes. So when an investor is looking to buy maybe a large portfolio of, for example, foreclosed assets from a bank or just from another investor, they sometimes need to do massive valuations. They can't go and value every single property with a drive-by valuation. Hence, they use what we call automatic valuation machines or models, whereby basically you gather data on all the comparable transactions in the market, and then you value on the basis of similar characteristics assets in sort of the proximity in order to get an automatic and quick value for that property. We also help asset holders understand their real estate exposure. So basically we analyze for banks, we try to understand what the current market value of their assets is, whether that could entail potential the need for additional provisions, etc. And we also look not only at the spot value but the future value. So we have internal models to estimate future HPI, something that was very popular now with COVID, and we apply those models to determine whether your real estate exposure is going to go up or down, basically. Furthermore, we help asset holders segment their portfolio. So we'll see now, I'll go into a bit of detail into some of the analysis and tools that we use, but we can take a portfolio from, again, I always say banks because I'm Spanish, and in Spain, banks have a lot of assets due to the financial crisis and all the things that have been happening. But any large asset holder, we can basically take their assets, analyze it according to our KPIs and models, and determine, what would be best to do with those assets. Are those assets something that you should rent, sell, rent for a bit and then sell, etc. Right? And then we also have these sort of analysis more on the value add spectrum of the real estate, whereby what we analyze is more in the sense of land plots, or works in progress, so WIPs, and we basically, on the basis of all the information that we gather, we determine whether those land plots would be basically fit for build to rent or build to sell, or senior housing, student housing, co-living, all these sort of value add solutions that are very popular now in the real estate world. Additionally, we also help investors determine the best spots to create to invest their money, and we're working on other more future business lines, more in the B2C line of the market, but I'm not really ready to talk about those yet. So that's just very briefly what we do, and I'm going to give you some examples of the tools that we utilize. So we mentioned before, sorry, I need to stop sharing and share the tool itself. 1 second here. Share again. So this would be this, right? So this is just to give you an example of what I was mentioning again with sort of what an automatic valuation does. So if you're seeing my screen now, apologies, I won't go into much detail to sort of avoid wasting too much time, but basically here you can write the address for any building in Spain. You put in the meters, the bathrooms, the floor, the rooms, etc., and this will generate an automatic valuation. You can download a report which has a lot more information in there, and it will also give you sort of the metrics of that neighborhood. So basically, how have prices in that neighborhood been evolving, what the demand in that neighborhood is by surface area, the morphological properties of the surrounding dwellings. There's really a lot of them. You have social demographics in the sense of, what's the gross average income over there, what's the average age of people in that area, et cetera, right? I don't want to bore you. I'll get into detail of sort of all these indicators now. But basically, this is how we can automatically value a platform, and then we have this sort of tool to help people understand that valuation. This would be sort of just one level of the platform when we're trying to give a spot value for an asset. And then, as I mentioned, I won't go through sort of all the things we have, but another example would be, I mentioned that, we have a tool to identify the best locations to invest in. So if I remember how to use this, apologies, because it's a live version, so this is changing every day. But basically here you have every neighborhood in Spain, and unless I break it, sorry. Yeah, sorry, too much zoom. And then basically you can search on the basis of, what am I looking for? Am I looking for houses in the range of whatever price with yields above X%? Again, I won't do it now to not waste time, but basically you could, insert your investment criteria, and you would be highlighted with the areas in Spain where these things could be found. Basically, these sort of assets would be found with these characteristics. So, sorry, I just wanted to show that tool really quickly, but we don't have time to go into detail, so I'll come back to the presentation. That is in a gist sort of how we aim, the big data. So we try to give, or we position ourselves more on the investor side and trying to give transparency and access to information to the different people. And the sort of data that we gather is basically, I would say, based on more or less 4 pillars. So we gather demographic context information. So we gather this generally from, the Statistical Institute, from the local populations. There's, the European one, et cetera. We basically amalgamate every single source of information that we find in order to be able to provide at the deepest or most granular level possible, this information. Then, you have urban context information. This is more basically your proximity to areas of interest. So basically how near an asset is to, for example, higher education, education for children. I forget the name in English, sorry, or schools, etc., public transport. So basically your proximity to all sorts of things, also in urban context. And this is not from sort of an open source, although it could be in the future. We also have an identifier in Spain. There's sort of a bit of a problem now with squatters due to the new government we have. Basically, we also have identified areas of risk where you could have potential squatter risk, but this is more on the basis of private information that we've gathered, from private agreements. So it's not really open source. Then, we also have morphological KPIs. This is, I think, Pau mentioned that at the beginning that, some European countries have sort of information regarding the stocks. In Spain, there's a thing called the cadastre, where, there's information regarding basically the full real estate stock. Not all of the information is perfect or not as granular as we would like, and it doesn't always include all the variables that we would like. But at least in Spain, because for example, we work in Spain, Italy, Greece, and Portugal, and for example, Spain is far better than Greece, where there's absolutely none of this information. But basically, on the basis of this, you can understand, the nature of the stock. Is there, houses between what square meter range, what types of housings, when were they built, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and that can help you to determine basically lacks or areas where a certain typology isn't being covered, or where there's an excess, et cetera. So basically, by coupling the morphological with the sort of demand metrics that we'll see now, we determine where there's gaps in demand or supply. And then with regards to the financial KPIs, which for us are the most interesting, the truth is that these are very hard to build with public information. It would be wonderful if it was possible, but sadly the public information is just not recorded in a way that it is useful. Even in Spain, where it is recorded, because I'm not even talking about Greece where it's not recorded, but in Spain where it is recorded, the way it's recorded is just not useful because it's not sufficiently flexible. So the way we develop our financial KPIs is basically we have agreements with all of the real estate portals, and going to Pau's initial mention that there is no sort of information on the energy certificates. I would give the example that this is sort of another example that we have in Spain with sort of open source versus private source information. If you go to the cadastre, it's true what he said, there is no information on the energy certificates. But if you go to a real estate listing portal, any asset that is listed on that portal, you will know the quality of the energy certificate, because it's a field that people fill in when they want to sell their house. So just as a sort of quick thought in that sense, maybe an agreement with real estate portals could help fill in that information a lot quicker, and maybe establishing it as a pre-requirement in sort of notaries when you close a deal to include that characteristic and then feed it into the different cadastres, or in the case of Greece that you would need to create a cadastre, but that might be a way to go about that. So with regards to the financial KPIs, basically what we track here is price evolutions, timing evolutions, et cetera, et cetera. I'll get into the detail of this because there's a few more visual examples, but again, hard to do with open information, easy to do with sort of the private information that we can get. And here I just put 4 very brief examples. Sorry, am I wasting too much time, Judas? Or am I still good?
Not wasting. You're going a little bit over the top, but not wasting.
Okay. So I'll go really quickly now. Basically, with these 4 models, what we determine is on this first one over here, the liquidity, or basically how easily you can sell a property. And we combine this by knowing how much or how many of the listed properties in a neighborhood are sold in a given quarter, and how long it takes to sell them. You combine those 2 metrics and you understand how easy it is to sell a house in a given area. Here, what we would be seeing is sort of the price evolution or real estate cycle of the different assets in the different neighborhoods, whereby what you're comparing is historical price maximums and price tendencies, year-on-year price tendencies, so growth versus decrease. This basically builds out a circle, which is the way that your price functions in a normal real estate cycle, whereby you will have rising phases, you will reach an inflection point, and then you will go back into a sort of a declining phase until you restart the cycle again. And on the bottom, we just have basically some analysis that we do with regards to risk and yield. So basically price fluctuations versus the gross yield that you can charge on an asset, whereby assets with low fluctuation and high yield are obviously your best sort of bet to rent, and then just an analysis on what is cheaper, renting or buying in different areas. again, this is more focused on the financial aspect and the way that we look at it and monetize it in that way. With regards to, and just to sum up, with regards to the challenges that we've found, I would mention, you know, the different granularity of data, even in the same country. So basically in Spain, we can get some information on an asset by asset level, some information we only have at municipality level, some at district level, some at national level. So mixing and matching all of that is complicated. Obviously, the more granular, the better. There's different levels of information across Europe. I'll go back to my example of Spain and Greece. Greece, no cadastre. Spain does have cadastre. So obviously, that means that we need to create a different algorithm for each country, which makes it a lot harder for us to do what we want to do. And I would say also with regards to, and I'm finishing right now, with regards to the sort of transactional information that is recorded, and I understand the data protection, you know, caveats and all of that. But I think that, you know, it would be very helpful if, you know, Europe or you know, some governing entity could make it so that, you know, when transactions are recorded, they are recorded with absolutely all the information that is available in the real estate listing, because I mean, that's really just copy and pasting and it shouldn't be that difficult. And that would already improve it massively. And also that this information is more flexible, so that it is geocoded, so that you can then treat it at any boundary level or at any geographical level that you want. As long as you assign it to, you know, a lat long, then you can do whatever you want with it. I won't go any longer. Apologies for overextending.
Thank you, Manuel. Much appreciated. I mean, of course, it's difficult really to keep within the time limits, but unfortunately, we only have so much time to work with here. But very, very interesting. Unless there's a question from the audience for Manuel, I would also maybe then suggest to have this question either in the Q&A section or in the chat. Please put it there so we can come back to it. And maybe I wouldn't stall anymore, but I will just mention here that Manuel, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from the perspective of UDA, you're not only in the position of, you know, benefiting and using and building upon big data, but you're also contributing in a way to the big data ecosystem, because you do have to the over 100 and roughly 190 set KPIs. You do also have an API, right? So yeah. There is a possibility to leverage basically what you are doing with the big data. So not to get into that now, but perhaps if you have a line or two, then we would still come back to it towards the end of the session, if time allows. I think it could be very interesting to see how you're sort of also, you know, participating as a benefactor, but also as a contributor to the big data ecosystem. Sure. Very interesting perspective there. So I'll get back to that still, Manuel. But if no further questions from the audience, or perhaps something that you can think of at a later stage, please do come back to us. There's one in the chat. No, I think I was mistaken. Okay, perfect. So with that, we have concluded the second example. And now finally, or last but not least, I would like to welcome Cross-CPP to tell us a little bit more about enabling innovative cross-sectorial data services. So again, a little bit of a holistic picture here, more from the ecosystem perspective. So please, welcome. Join us. I think you should have all the power to share your screen.
I hope so.
The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Rai. So let me first try to share my screen.
And I promise that we'll turn to the break, a very brief break after this, yes, to get some air.
I will try to keep it short as possible, okay? So I'm not sure that we can do it first in 8 minutes or 10 minutes, but let us see. I'll try to, do not want to steal more time. Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank you very much, Rai, as well as Mikael, to give us opportunity here also to present a bit outcome of our project. So Cross-CPP is an European funded project, started in 2017, in December 2017, and will end exactly end of February this month. So we are exactly at the end. So it's also time to present a bit results to such a community like we have it here today. So myself, I'm Christian Wolf. I'm senior researcher at the Institute for Applied System Technology. It's ATB called. So we are from Germany, and the consortium behind the whole project, as you can see here from the slide, is consisting of some bigger industry like Volkswagen and Siemens. So they have a role in scope of the project of providing data. And here in the sense are vehicle data, the data from cars, as well as data from buildings, because Siemens is here with a department delivering solutions for smart home and buildings. Then we have Atos as a software solution provider responsible for building up marketplace and putting all data together. And moreover, also a service provider partner, the Meteorologics. So that's weather, a very innovative weather service company providing weather services to multiple different end users at the end. And we have expert open group here also for security, privacy, and 2 universities, which are more or less have tasks in scope of Cross-CPP to build up some data analytics stuff, which we can also offer at the end also to our customers. So if we go on, okay. What is Cross-CPP about? So Cross-CPP, so this, as mentioned before, is more or less a project where we build up trustful and attractive data markets and data solutions where we can share and offer data streams for multiple smart products at the end to third-party providers, which would like to use this information also to build services out of that. And next things which we have in mind also in scope of Cross-CPP was also mentioned at the beginning here was that we will also build up some services out of this data by our own, also by our service providers involved in the project. And so I think it's clear that we do not have to talk about, the value of data. So I think it's undoubted that data from smart products are of very high value and represent also, a prime data resource for building up new business opportunities which you do not have in your portfolio, but also to improve business which you have already in your portfolio. And that's exactly what we address in the scope of the project, so that we would like to build up ecosystem solution here to make access to sensor data, especially in the scope of our project here coming from vehicles, so from cars, as well as also from buildings, and make access to this data available. We heard it already in the beginning. That's one of a big problem. That's also one of our motivation, which we heard also from a lot of different service providers, that they have really, really big problems in having access in this data, especially if they would like to have access data from different areas. But even if you would like to have access just from one area, it's very hard to have access to this. And this is hindering at the end that they came up with innovative services. And another stuff is also that we have then the problem that we have a very fragmented data market. So meaning in the sense that we have different platforms, not one platform offering, or some platforms offering data from one domain, like automotive domain, thinking about vehicle data. This is something which will, when it will be offered via different platforms. And this means at the end also for service provider that he has connect his own system to different other platforms, to diverse platforms with multiple interfaces and multiple data models. And this is exactly also this thing where we have to think about some standardization issues to make the things much more easier at the end for people interested in getting access to this data. What we also realized is that, what we found is that often whole ecosystems were implemented, especially in bigger industry like car industry, but they just use data for their own services and do not allow other partners to have access to information. So implementing everything at the end and just providing a couple of services to their customers and shows them also at the end that's not a very economical and a clever solution. And by this, they also waste innovation potentials because they also do not have all experts inside of the company. So clever ideas often come from people which are dealing with complete other stuff. So if they will have access to, for example, vehicle or building data, they also can do other things out of that. So this is a bit different from what you have in your project in mind, so that we are not just would like to use data coming from buildings, for example, to create also services for building out of that. This is also something which we have in mind, but also offering this information for other service providers. So important is overall everything we did here is exactly something which is, yes, really driven by our key stakeholders, meaning at the end it's a data owner, for example, owner of a house, building, of a vehicle, but especially also of data providers like OEMs or data customers which would like to build services out of this. So Cross-CPP project here is at the end not the starting point where we start with. So we have already in the past some previous project running, especially this Automat project, where we came up with the idea, and this was an idea was born together with car makers, especially with Volkswagen, but also together with Renault and Fiat. And they really struggled a bit with the situation that there is at one side no market at all available where you can get data from cars from, and on the other side also the big problem that all the data, when it will be provided for third parties, have different formats and different interfaces, and this makes the solutions at the end not really, yes, attractive, and then also not economically. So therefore, we start an Automat project to defining a whole ecosystem where the whole procedures from gathering, processing data inside of a company like a car maker should be done. Also setting up then in the project an data marketplace, which will then at the end a data marketplace which is brand independent, so that we have not a marketplace for different OEMs, so just one marketplace where you can offer data from different OEMs in a single marketplace at the end, and then together also thinking about some standardization. So how when we can up there within a data model. So as we have just one interface and one data model where all data also from different brands can be handled in the same way and make it much more easier at the end to make use of that. So afterwards, then we identified also during project runtime that especially service providers involved in the project were not only looking for data coming from vehicles, they had also interest in having data access to other data, like data from buildings. And this was then also starting point for Cross-CPP. Because here we really then start to make the whole system open and more flexible also for integration of data from other sectors, and have also worked out this model so that it's much more, or that's open also for the integration of data from other industrial areas, and developed also in addition some tools helping partners to analyze data already in the marketplace, improve the marketplace, and so on. At the end, then we have achieved there also one job providing data streams from diverse smart products, so from buildings as well as from vehicles, and by this offering, much higher quality content to build out services from this data. So we implemented feature here, started in an Automat, but also improved this, that data owner is always aware of what data he is offering to whom, and has always a control about this. It's very important, especially if you have a real owner of a house or a car in the background. I think they always would like to know what is done by the data, who is using the data, and so on. And as mentioned before, we did not develop the whole system for integration and exchange of data and offering data and the data model. We also had a service provider and scope of our project, like our weather service experts, building up weather services based on, especially sensor data from buildings as well as vehicles. Vehicles are especially interesting because they're moving around. So you got a lot of more information about the weather than what you normally have in Europe. about temperature, humidity, and all the stuff which are of interest for weather forecast information. And this is something which I really use and also to build up the very precise high resolution weather models, which have a resolution of 100 meter. And this is at the end and also really starting point in Nucleus also to build up a lot of services which you can do with this, because with such an information and forecast information, you can really precisely say how the weather will be at an exact point. So also this is something which is of high interest also for buildings, because if you really want to control a building in a smart and in an energy efficient way, that's also something which Siemens has in mind here in scope of the project, and it's also important that they know a bit more information about weather. Furthermore, they build up here weather services together with Volkswagen, so that they used also data from weather service, but also from their cars, to use it to have weather warnings during the drive, but also use this for navigation services. So that's also something which will be used, and it's a basic information and input for later autonomous driving. So when you go for higher autonomous driving levels, and it should be in prerequisite that you know already before you start a journey how the weather will be on your road, especially if you think about snow. So then you know from the beginning, okay, maybe the driver has to take the control over, and then you can tell it. It's a beginning of a journey or Kanban in time. So go on and save some time because we are late.
Yes, thank you.
But we stopped not here. So we identified also in Cross-CPP that we have also another issue where we have to talk about and where we have to find solutions for. And this is especially connected with trust. And this is something we must have at the end, all the partners in the boat, and you have to convince them that they are really willing to give access to the data. And it's not for the data owner. This is also an issue at the end for OEMs, because if you think about partners like Volkswagen with this diesel scandal, they don't want to have a data scandal at the end. So, and therefore we really need to come up with some solutions so that they really can trust, okay, that they will not have some reputational damages at the end or RDPR punishments which they came up. This is issues which we handle then in a follow-on project, so a Smash It project dealing exactly with this, and also making the whole process of consent agreement much more easier at the end for all partners involved. And then just let me brief up at the end. So I think it's clear we will have these growing business potentials. This is something which will grow much more in the near future, because the number of smart products will increase, and this will be for sure something where we can profit and should profit on. And on the same side, we have then also much more requests from a lot of partners who would like to have access to this information, like we heard also here from the building sector. But we have to solve all the challenges addressed before. So we have to overcome the limited access to the data, and this we mostly have to see that we have to increase therefore willingness of the partners like the data provider and data owner, and therefore one of most important issue for sure is also trust, but also we have to come up with some standardization issues and some bigger markets, so that we also have to overcome data market fragmentation and make things much more economical at the end for the data customer. So this was a very brief, very rough overview. So 10 minutes are very short, but I hope you got at least some kind of ideas what we do in our projects here.
Absolutely, I think definitely more than enough just to have an overview, I think, and many, at least personally for me, from the context of our work here in this project, many of the things are very, very interesting. So I'll be happy if we remain in touch here. If there are any questions from the audience to Christian, please do let us know. And of course, we can still address them in a little bit of a buffer that we have towards the end. For me personally, it would be very interesting to see how sort of sustainable and how what is the supply and demand in the sense of the marketplace that you're working to develop, and sort of perhaps also the openness and access and the demand from the stakeholders. But I'll keep that question in my head, and either I'll ask it towards the end or perhaps then offline, and hopefully also have a chance to share with all our participants here. But in order not to move too much away from our indicative schedule, as I mentioned in the chat, if everybody's fine, because I think the energy and the flow of the webinar is actually too good to break it up by a break. So if you really do not mind, then what I would like to suggest is to move on to the next section, which is of course to involve our dear colleagues from the European Commission. I think we're all very, very interesting on some of the updates that they will share with us, and having a little bit of an overview of or a quick peek into what's ahead of us from their side. I think they're going to provide some answers to some of the questions that we discussed already, some of the points we discussed already. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Ilektra Papadaki, who's from the European Commission from DG GROW, to tell us a little bit more about the framework for digital building logbooks. Ilektra, a little technical question right from the start. What about the presentation? Should I share or will you share?
Yes, let me do an effort here to see if I will manage. And you let me know if you can see my slides.
Fantastic, perfect.
Perfect. Thanks a lot for giving me the word. It was very nice to hear all the other presentations before coming and presenting the policy context. Normally we do the opposite, but it gives me a lot of hooks to try to cover our perspective from the Commission. So regarding data, there is an initiative we have ongoing regarding digital building logbooks in DG GROW. It's a reflection that has started a few years ago, but materialized since 2020 with a dedicated study that we run together with a consortium from R2M, BPIE and VITO in order to assess the situation in Europe, to see what is already out there, what are the expectations from different stakeholders, and in the end, what could be the role of the Commission in the development of digital building logbooks. So this study conducted extensive stakeholder consultations through interviews, surveys, and workshops in order to collect knowledge, but also collect the vision of different stakeholders. That we saw it also in this workshop on what could be the role of logbooks, as well as collected experiences from sectoral and national initiatives around Europe. Putting all of this together, analyzed the gaps, the opportunities and the challenges of existing initiatives, and in the end came up with recommendations to the Commission. But first, what do we want to achieve through digital building logbooks? We imagine the digital building logbooks as the tool that brings together data, information, and documents for a building accessible through one place, not necessarily all in one place, but accessible through that. We imagine them dynamic, of course, digital and dynamic, as it was said in different presentations. Sometimes we have paper tools in place, but in order to advance forward, we really need to talk in the language of new technologies. So digital building logbooks should be dynamic and keep a record of the different events in the life of a building. And increase transparency, trust, and informed decision-making for the different players of the value chain, as well as owners, investors, and others. Of course, the logbooks are well linked with data and all the debates that come with privacy and access to data. So, of course, as a tool, they should allow data owners to have control over their data and share them when they wish. Through this different potential, the logbooks can support the two very important priorities of the current Commission, being the digital and the green transition. Of course, they contribute to the European data strategy. Of course, they can modernize the sector and therefore contribute to the industrial strategy, but we also have them in strategic Commission documents linked to the European Green Deal, and there, as you can see, they have a recognized role to play. In the Renovation Wave communication, we had the digital building logbooks mentioned as the tool that will integrate all building-related data and bring together all this information that we have available from building renovation passports or the smart readiness indicator, EPC databases, but also feed some of this on these tools in ways that we will have to develop in the years to come. And of course, they can also contribute to the circularity in the built environment and therefore allow more sustainability in the sector. I think it was also one of the questions of that in this before, how we can have through data a more sustainable building and construction sector. And I think that there comes the availability of information. And if we indeed have more availability of information on materials, equipment, on the building and all its sub-elements, we can have also more sustainable management of resources. But going a step back again into the study and the work that was developed there, the first milestone was to agree on a definition for the digital building logbooks. And this is very important because there was a lack of language, a language that everybody understands and everybody can communicate. We have digital building logbooks, building passports, building code ID, registry, as one of the presenters mentioned. And all of them are initiatives that they have commonalities, they have common characteristics, but they don't exist under one definition in Europe. So the extended definition of digital building logbooks that you can also find available in the Publications Office of the European Commission tries to describe the different characteristics that I mentioned earlier, that the logbook is the common repository, that it should increase transparency and trust, should increase availability of data across the life cycle, merge static and dynamic type of information and even real-time type of information, but also the extended definition that we have available brings also some information on the interactions between the different stakeholders and what are the most relevant stakeholders that have to be benefited and benefit the development of logbooks. Another pillar of the study was the analysis of existing initiatives, and there we really saw that there is a big spectrum of ways of collecting data about buildings across the EU. There are initiatives that are put in order to collect and organize and make available data for individual houses or for office buildings or for industrial buildings. There are initiatives that are mandatory and initiatives that are voluntary, that they have a high level of digitalization or no digitalization at all. So we collected all of these initiatives, and through their different characteristics and the consultation, we identified what are the key challenges of some initiatives that are not going well or that they completely failed, and what could be the success factors of the existing initiatives, and therefore the success factors could guide us in order to propose a robust European framework for digital building logbooks. So some indicatively, some success factor of existing initiative is that there was a good preparatory work and stakeholder consultation and studies and test cases. There was a clear legal framework for these initiatives to develop. The user aspect was taken into account with platforms that are user-friendly, that it's easy not only to get data from the logbook, but also to provide data to the logbook. The information was reliable in the successful initiatives, and there was a clear vision. Very often there is a lack of clear vision why many stakeholders or building owners ask why we should go through this burden of keeping this information updated, why we should get into one new tool that has to collect on the information. And there comes the clear scope and the political will, and very often the ability of the logbooks to use information that is located elsewhere. And there comes the full conceptualization of the digital building logbook that should enable interoperability and data sharing, and incorporate data that can come from different databases, either EPC databases or other types of public registries or material passports, but also data that come from specific stakeholders, or models such as building information models that are produced either in the beginning of the life cycle or when a major intervention is coming. And in the end, in order to proceed, we have to imagine the logbook as a gateway, indeed, as it was mentioned in the renovation wave, to all building related data. And this poses a lot of requirements on setting up all these data protocols, on imagining all these interactions, and in the end developing a robust way of communicating and implementing this concept across the EU. The study in its final step gave some recommendations to the Commission on how to proceed. The principal way of proceeding will be through a technical study to cover the data approach, and this is meant to start in 2022 with a lot of involvement from the industry and the member states, and this will certainly lead to the voluntary implementation of the digital building logbook by the member states that wish to. After that, it will already take some time. The situation can be reassessed and it could be decided if the voluntary implementation is something that is enough and something that the member states agree with, or if some harder measures, let's say, of illegal adoptions will be necessary. This sums up a bit the work on the logbooks, that it is a really principal work stream when we speak about data in buildings. But I would like to say that there are also some other work streams that run in parallel on the digitalization of the building permit system, and the uptake of the building information modeling, and then in the end the conversion of all these different work streams comes to data, and bridging all of these tools and processes and make them work for each other will really define the way that we work with the construction sector and the building sector in the near future. That is from my side for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilektra. I think it was extremely exhaustive, and thanks for trying to sort of fit it into this shorter time slots that we have in our hands today. Maybe if I still may keep this with you, Ilektra. I'm sure you mentioned it at points in the presentation as well, but just for the audience here, is there any specific next steps as a summary that you could tell us what to look out for, what could be beneficial to be sort of part of your work? What to focus on? Of course, we'll if you allow, we will share the presentation with the audience, and there's very good links in the end. I had a look personally, so good to keep an eye on that. But just maybe some quick next steps or points where to be involved, what to look forward to.
Yes, a very good question. Indeed, the study now is publicly available in the Publications Office of the EU, and there if someone is interested to read it, the last part comes with the detailed recommendations, and these recommendations will be the next step. The technical study is meant to start in 2022, and it will have its own, how can I say, it will have a content on stakeholder consultation again, and there we will reach publicly and in the network that was created in the previous study, of course. And what you can see in the final report is also that there is a lot of room for research and innovation in the area, because how can I say, the logbook should be a fertile ground to build upon, to have plugins and extensions that are useful for different target groups or different stakeholders. So there we imagine that there should be funding and European initiatives in this area. So we have done proposals accordingly through major programs to the member states, and we should know soon if there will be dedicated calls for that.
Okay, perfect. So, well, hopefully then, I mean, if we continue this collaboration, I hope the stakeholders that are participating in our project could then be somehow included in your effort, because I think, at least from the discussion that we had already, I think there's quite a strong will and openness to participate in stakeholder consultations, and well, especially where it makes the best sense and highest impact. So let's hopefully still continue the discussion, perhaps offline. Thank you very much, Ilektra. Perfect. So really, thank you. And next up, just a few words from again our good colleague Pau. I think this is going to be sort of the final point of the program today. And if we still have a little bit of time, we have 2 questions pending and an outline of what will happen next. Pau, if you will.
Yes, I'm trying to just share the screen. Just 1 second. And it should be, can you see the presentation at the moment?
Not just yet, but perhaps slowly arriving.
Just a second. Just 1 second. I'm really sorry, but it's telling me that the browser is not letting me. Would you mind?
Not at all. Let me share it immediately.
Apologies for the last minute problems.
No worries whatsoever. Okay, great. So let's see. Perfect. I'm going to see an island for a second, but the presentation coming up. Good.
Okay, so if you could just move straight into the next one. Yes. So, well, my name is Pau Garcia. I work at DG Energy B3, which is the unit in charge of energy efficiency in buildings and products. In particular, in the area of buildings, my unit is the one dealing with the energy performance of buildings directive. We are the ones that contracted this big data contract because we see that data in the field of energy efficiency in buildings is something that we really need to look into the future and see which areas we need to reinforce, how we can reinforce it, which policies we can put in place, for example, in order to make sure that this data is available and used. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of the session, one of the big problems we have at the moment is the information on buildings. It's very limited, both at the level of building stock, but also at the level of individual buildings. And a lot of the times, this data comes from different sources. It's very fragmented. It's incomplete. We have a number of buildings, but we use different techniques to try and extrapolate the information to the whole of the building stock. The quality sometimes is not very good. Anybody that, for example, has looked at the information coming from building automation and control systems in buildings knows that sometimes there are glitches in the systems or specific sensors stop recording. Sometimes the national archives also are incomplete. This information, because it comes from different places, it's also not coherent or not fully consistent. For example, one member state may have a definition of building area, and another member state has a different definition for a building area. So things don't always fully match. And we need this information for a number of issues. The first one I would say is to improve the transparency of the building sector, and particularly with regards to energy efficiency. This is something that has been mentioned before, for example, in the area of real estate. We also need this information in order to support the policies that we are putting in place. For example, we are now we issued in October the renovation wave, which is really to try and increase the renovation the renovation rates of buildings, and for that we need to be able to see what is the problem, what is the worst performing building stock, where are they located, what kind of buildings are we dealing with, what kind of building owners we're dealing with, who needs the support. This information is also particularly relevant in order to support investment, be it public, like grants, or private, like loans from banks, and also, for example, in the case of real estate, to see how much more valuable is an energy efficient building compared to a non-energy efficient building. And over time, we also need all this information in order to see what has worked and what hasn't worked, and what has worked in a certain member state or hasn't worked in another member state. So all of this is the kind of information that we definitely use, and that we definitely need to use in the future, and that unfortunately a lot of the times it's either not there and we have to make assumptions, or there are issues with the quality, etc. So if you can move to the next slide, please, Yuri. So at the moment, in terms of data for buildings, we have a number of ongoing initiatives. The most relevant one at the level of the energy performance of buildings directive is what we call the Building Stock Observatory. It's a repository of data coming from different sources about the energy performance of buildings. So it has, for example, information on number of buildings, area of buildings, kilowatt hours per square meter, energy rating according to the EPCs, etc., etc. But as I mentioned, a lot of this information is incomplete or inconsistent, so we have to look at it with care. Like, we have to be very careful how we use this information, and this is one of the areas where we want to improve the level and detail of information and the quality of information. Another area just presented by Ilektra Papadaki is the digital building logbook. And of course, we have a number of research and development projects financed under Horizon 2020, which will continue to be, it's an area that will continue to be financed under Horizon Europe and LIFE. In area of buildings policy, the energy performance of buildings directive. Specific areas that we're looking at right now. For example, how we can improve the information and availability of information in EPC databases. So, for example, we're looking into, could we develop an EPC machine-readable format, be it, for example, a PDF format or template or a CSV file? How could we make sure that member states make public the information available on these EPC databases? Of course, provided that it complies with all the data protection and privacy regulations. So maybe a monthly report or a quarterly report, what kind of information should be in these kind of EPC reporting mechanisms. So all of this is information and policy areas that we are looking at right now. Other areas is, for example, the building renovation passport. As I mentioned before, we've issued the renovation wave, which is the communication and the renovation wave, which is a set of ideas and strategies in order to increase the renovation wave. Well, one of them is this building renovations passport that describe exactly what needs to be done to a specific building in order to make sure that it can achieve a very high level of energy performance and integration of renewables. Well, how this passport should be developed, what kind of information these passports should have, is all information we are looking at right now. And then we also have, for example, the smart drainage indicator, which is an indicator of new creation. The regulation governing this indicator were adopted in December and are just starting to enter into force right now. And it's a voluntary scheme for member states to rate the smart drainages of a building. So it doesn't measure the energy performance as such, but it does measure the level of comfort or the level of energy efficiency that the smartness can help to achieve, how well it responds to the needs of the users, how well it facilitates the maintenance of the building, and, for example, very importantly, the level of flexibility with regards to smart networks that a building can provide. And that's something particularly relevant because we don't have a lot of information right now, or we don't have many mechanisms to report how flexible in terms of smart grids is the building. And then finally, we have general measures to improve the digitalization of the building sector. So, for example, the use of building information modeling. All of these are elements that can help provide better information over the course of the coming years. Next slide, please, Yuri. And I mentioned several times the Energy Performance Buildings Directive, and that brings me to the last slide of today, which is we are currently undergoing a revision of the EPBD. It's a targeted revision. We are focusing on those provisions that will help us boost building renovations. For example, one of the issues we're looking at is the energy performance certificate, how we can improve this, as I mentioned right before, how we can improve the certificates in order to make them more reliable, in order for them to provide better information, and also how we can improve the reporting mechanisms of these EPC. So I would, for example, I would be very interested to know what the urban data analytics thinks that should these EPC databases should provide in terms of information, and how this information should be reported. That could be quite relevant for us. In terms of future steps, just today we've issued the roadmap. This is a very first rough outlook at what the this review of the EPC will look at, what elements are we going to touch upon. It's open for feedback until the 22nd of March, so I invite everybody to have a look at it. And if you want to send us any feedback, please feel free. These will be very useful for us. There is going to be another opportunity to provide feedback, because we are going to issue an open public consultation in the coming month, right after the roadmap. And that will provide more information about the specific options we are considering in terms of this revision of the EPBD. And you can grade the different options, you can provide feedback on these different options, or you can provide input on these different options. We are also looking at direct engagements with stakeholders in the coming months, probably via a number of workshops that we will start organizing very soon. We are still not very sure exactly how we are going to organize them, whether they're going to be by topics or whether they're going to be by groups of stakeholders. We are not sure, but please keep an eye open for any activities we are launching in this area. And finally, our planning is to have the proposal by the Commission, the Commission's proposal on this revision of the EPBD by the end of the year. So it's going to be an intensive year for us, definitely, and I cannot stress enough how important for us it is to get information from you at this information, input, feedback, etc. from you at this point, because the area of data information and in buildings is an area where we don't have a lot of information at the moment. We don't have a lot of data, and we are particularly open to receive any information on how we can improve that. So thank you very much to all of you for being here today. And I give you back the control, Yuri.
Thank you very much, Pau. So great, and thank you for summarizing with really the next steps, how to get involved. Again, we will be sharing this information, but good if you were able to take a note, not to forget. And I think we're just about running out of time. So what I would like to do here now is turn back to my slides and direct your attention to a couple of the, let's say, next steps from our perspective, from the perspective of the project. So just a second here, just to be able to come back to the right presentation. Great, sorry. So again, you will see my lovely desktop, the island. And great, okay, so you should see now back to my slides. We do have a couple of questions, but of course, since we're already 3 minutes past, we would not like to keep you longer. As we speak now, we're preparing an answer to the question of cognition world. That was a question on the IoT meters or usage of IoT meters in the energy distribution network operators. So some positive and negative approaches. So that will be posted shortly. But just a reminder, what's ahead of us, and maybe a little bit of a call to action. For us, absolutely crucial. If you have not done so yet, please, we would like to call your attention to the questionnaire that we have prepared. The question is structured in a way to really hit on the main points that we're addressing in the project, but there are some open answers. And of course, we will provide you with the contact details where we would really like or really appreciate if you get in touch with us with the opportunity to discuss a bit more directly some of the points that are perhaps most pressing for you, or that you would like to see
promoted and supported. Great. So in terms of next steps and what's ahead of us, the stakeholder consultation continues. So we're still very hard working on gathering as much information as possible in order to make the analysis of responses and other consultations. Again, in this period until the 31st of March, we're completely open to any suggestions, completely open to any outreach. Here and there, we will also trying to make this more visible through reminders and also perhaps some social media content. If you are in any of the networks on LinkedIn, feel free to share as well with your network. If you know some company or some stakeholder that may be interested in having a say in this process, would very much appreciate it. In terms of what's then the, let's say, homework for us after this stakeholder consultation comes to an end, we'll be very busy working on the development of proposals which will build on or stem from the findings that we have from the stakeholder consultation. So many of the topics also mentioned here, many of the issues that you have identified for us, and many of the things that I think sort of we are reaching an agreement on in terms of access, visibility, privacy concerns, interoperability, etc. So this will everything fit into our work after the stakeholder consultation, and the outcome of this project will be, apart from other materials, also a detailed assessment of 10 most promising proposals, which can then serve as supportive measures or perhaps even policies that could accelerate the development of the big data ecosystem as a whole in the, let's say, near and short-term, mid-term future. So again, keeping an open mind, really not focusing strictly on buildings, but also any connections that are more towards other or more overarching ecosystems such as smart cities, smart mobility, or any of the things that come into direct contact and have a direct impact on
So as promised, I will share the last slide. It seems that we lost audio for a second. Hope we're back.
Yeah, we can hear you. Back.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. The technicality towards the end. So sort of a goodbye. So take a note of these contacts. Either way, we will still be in touch with the materials from this webinar to share with you after we're done. And of course, any questions or any inputs that you would still like to share with us, highly appreciate them. and we'll be looking forward to additional consultations, sort of one-to-one bilateral. That being said, I would like to thank you all for joining this webinar and for being part of the project. It's titled Better Data for Better Buildings, Realizing the Role of Big Data. And we very much look forward to being further in touch, and also to receiving further answers to the questionnaire. In terms of participation, so far the response rate has been very, very good, and also the level of depth and the level of insight. So many people are taking advantage of this opportunity and going into a little more detail in terms of what's missing and what could be added or improved. So I hope you'll join us in this as well, and we'll definitely be looking out for your responses. I personally still have time on my hands, so I don't know if there's will to stay on here and to answer any of the questions. If not, we can of course try to answer them offline, or perhaps come back to them once we share also the materials. So I'll look for the sign. If people start to leave slowly, I'll take it as a signal that you're happy for now and no further questions to be asked here. If people decide to stay, happy to continue the discussion or answer the questions that we have in the, let's say pipeline, in the backlog. So again, thank you very much, everybody, for being here, for joining us. I hope this has been beneficial for you, and definitely for us, to see a little bit more how you're working with data, and to tell you especially how we can leverage this project together to further advance the use of big data.
Thanks for moderating, UI, and thanks for the company's contributions.
Absolutely, my great pleasure.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here.
Exactly, also from my side.
But likewise.
And from my side, thank you. Well, thank you especially to the organizers for this session, and for all the panelists and to all the panelists for participating. Sorry, it's the end of the day, and yeah, my language skills are dropping by the minute. But I can stay here if necessary, if anybody has any questions.
I think where participants are slowly leaving, so I'll just sum up this answer to the question.
We had one question regarding the DNOs, right? Distribution networks operators.
Yes, indeed. So it's in the Q&A. It's in the Q&A section, Aaron. I don't know if you can see it. It came from Cognition World, still on the webinar. So I tried to summarize the answer, but perhaps if you would like to add anything there, or perhaps if the question has a follow-up question.
Well, since I'm very much engaged with my work in the energy sector, what I see is that it's kind of obvious, but what's necessary is that there needs to be an incentive for distribution network operators to have a way to monetize the data, or to somehow monetize the individual IoT applications that are being installed. So if there is some sort of business model behind it, I'm sure they will stop litigating against these installations. But in the observation for Italy is not necessarily representative for all countries. In other areas we talked about with UI, there are actually incentives to cooperate for the network operators. So yeah,
indeed, in some cases, in some countries, just to build up on that, Aaron, it is that the situation is quite opposite, and it's actually the DNOs themselves or energy companies themselves who are taking the proactive approach, and either through partners or through their own hardware or own solutions, they're actually pushing for let's say, use of IoT in meters, and making it not for the sake of data per se, but also improving the user experience, and also linking up with the smart home concept, and so trying to find the interconnections there as well. So I think different approaches from different country, but as I already offered to Cognition World, if there's a chance to discuss this, perhaps in a one-to-one discussion, or I think it would be very good for us to understand where you have encountered these challenges personally, and perhaps also to understand your perspective. Where could such data benefit your business model or your organization, or what could be developed as perhaps a new solution or an innovative solution that could prove to be as well, let's say, part of the incentive to support IoT meters.
Mm-hmm.
And a positive,
yeah. No,
sorry, I just want to say that a positive response came from Cognition World, so we'll definitely be in touch to organize a discussion. Happy to involve Aaron as well. Looking forward to that.
I think you've unmuted me, have you?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, it's Thomas McGrath here from Cognition World. So thanks, guys. Yeah, look, it's a really interesting issue because across Europe, it does vary. You're absolutely right. As you know, in countries like the UK, it's actually the supplier who has taken the burden for the sort of the smart metering side of things, while in some other European countries, it's the DNO. I think from our perspective, we've recently come across examples where the DNOs are looking to charge for their business customers in particular, to get the data in sort of more of a real-time, near real-time capacity, because business customers are looking to understand, obviously when they understand consumption in near real time, they're able to understand where the inefficiencies in their building are. So what you have across Europe is the data coming sometimes 24 hours later. In some cases, it comes at the end of the month, which doesn't allow the businesses and the organizations which are looking to reduce waste and increase efficiency. You know, they need to get that data in a system that's meaningful, or in a process that's meaningful to them. And the focus on from the energy companies has been on how this data can benefit generators, distributors, the transmission network, and in some cases the suppliers. But the focus hasn't gone on how do we use this data to make buildings smarter? How can we use them to increase the smart capability that exists inside, you know, modern buildings and building managers?
Yeah, I think I understand the point, and it's a really good point, which sort of brings me to a conclusion that I think it's also quite obvious, but maybe more difficult to realize. But it does sound, or it does seem across different countries, that this creates sort of also a window of opportunity, which of course is not really opening unless there is support and there is the will to cooperate from the DNOs in this sense. So I think I now better understand the question a little bit. Then we're perhaps looking for a good operating model, how this gap can be open to, let's say, to the competitive world in terms of who comes up with a better solution.
Yeah, and particularly as these IoT devices, I mean, you can put an IoT device on your meter from as little as, I don't know, 30, 40 euro, let's say, if you're buying them at scale, whilst a DNO will charge you 200 euro to get access to a box that you then need to plug into with a USB stick and then come up with a very complex communication network. Mm-hmm. The benefit of IoT is you can put a little device on a meter and it broadcasts wirelessly into the cloud with no cables, with no infrastructure, you don't even need Wi-Fi or 3G. So the technology exists. And when that data is taken and added with other data that comes from smart buildings in near real time, you're able to put together a very interesting picture to identify where there's inefficiencies and wastage, not just inside the building, but the operation of the building as well. So it's quite an interesting topic. And I think, yeah, we'd be happy to have further conversations to try and bring together some common perspectives on this.
Absolutely. Okay. No, point taken. And we'll definitely be in touch, because I think this is a topic we can further explore. Like I said, it's really from country to country. So perhaps in other countries, really, this problem is not that visible, and we'll be happy to explore what are the implications, and perhaps also look for solutions or approaches that have worked elsewhere and could potentially be scaled up. This is exactly, part of the work that we do. Is trying to identify solutions that can have a bigger impact if they're done on a larger scale, and taking into considerations the different specificities of the local market. So perfect. Thank you very much for bringing that up.
And thank you.
Right, can you see?
Okay.
Yeah. We had the other question regarding the embodied carbon, and I was wondering while answering it, with the current renovation wave, is there any efforts regarding embodied carbon, or more the life cycle assessment of buildings? How are you still on the call? Are you aware?
Yes,
of any?
Yes, definitely. DG Environment is putting together the levels framework, which measures the life cycle carbon throughout the lifetime of the building. So construction, use, and demolition. If you look for in Google for levels life cycle, it's one of the top. If not the top results that comes up on the search. They've already done a trial phase of the framework. They tested it. I think it was about 200 buildings across Europe. The results were very good. They are now in the process, as far as I remember, they are now in the process of trimming the methodology and correcting any issues that they have detected in this test phase. And then they will move forward with it. Exactly how it's going to be applied, I'm not sure. Meaning I don't know if it's going to be something like, for example, an EPC, or if it's going to be some sort of voluntary framework. I honestly do not know at this moment. But it's something you can check on DG Environment's page for this. But it is something that we are definitely considering. And also, for example, it was one of the aspects investigated during the preparation of the EU Green Taxonomy.
Good, thanks.
Okay, great. So thank you for staying 20 minutes over. I think it's been very interesting, very fruitful discussion. And with this, allow me to conclude it and not to keep you any longer on this evening. And of course, then we will be in touch with some of the materials to be shared after this webinar, and some additional information that was either mentioned or captured here. And then, of course, we'll be looking forward to the next steps. And I really hope that we will remain in closer contact, especially with this tighter group, perhaps. I think there's still quite a lot of points to discuss, more directly, perhaps, and more hands-on as we approach the, let's say, second stage of the project. So with that, thank you very much for being a terrific crowd. Thank you for the questions, for the participation, and for sharing insights from both sides. And I have nothing more to add. You have been amazing. Thank you for joining us, and I wish you a lovely evening.
Thanks, Johan. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.